This is episode 20 of the Women in Depth podcast. The information found in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hi, and welcome back to the podcast. When I was in the beginning stages of planning and creating Women in Depth, I knew that I wanted to create a podcast that talked about the lives of women. But specifically, I wanted to look deeply at the parts of a woman's experience that were uncomfortable, unfamiliar, and unknown. Parts of life that were hidden beneath the surface, that were feared, misunderstood, and just really not talked about. And today's topic is one of those areas. Today, my guest and I will be talking about the other woman in therapy. My guest today is Namrata Rindani McMahill, who is a couples and family therapist in San Diego, California. Nam's real title, however, is Advocate and Champion for the Discarded, Diagnosed, Marginalized, Shamed, and Judged People who are seeking support and strategies to not only feel empowered and strong about who they are, but want to feel confident and accepted in their relationships as well. Nam often describes her work with clients as involving learning how to wear your weirdness and vulnerability like the jeweled crown it really is, instead of living a life of secret shame, distress, battling internal and external judgment, and all the messiness that brings. Nam has been in the field for 12 years and studied and practiced in 2 continents and multiple languages. Nam says that she created her practice for those who want to be able to walk out on their last therapy session, being able to say, "This is who I am okay with it all, and my life is exactly how I want it to be, because it is aligned with who I am and what I want. I am okay no matter what." Hi, Nam, and welcome to Women in Depth.
Hi, Lourdes. Thank you so much for having me on your incredibly valuable podcast. It's such a pleasure to be here.
I am so excited that we're finally having this conversation that we have been talking about and planning for so long. And I think that what you're going to share is going to really resonate with a lot of women. And I think you'll also provide a lot of comfort and support and acceptance for a group of women who may not feel that or may not experience that. So Nam, can you just share a little bit more with our listeners about yourself and your practice?
Absolutely. My name is Nam, as Lourdes introduced me, and I have a private practice in Mission Hills, San Diego. I have been in the field for about 12 years, and I've had my practice for about 6 in San Diego. Something that my practice kind of stands out for is the people I work with are usually people that really, really struggle with shame. They struggle with being accepted. They struggle with something I often say is you feel diseased, you feel discarded, you feel socially rejected. And my practice is designed to help anyone who feels marginalized or feels shamed socially and personally to feel really, really empowered and accepting of who they really are.
Wow, I love the way that you describe the individuals that you work with, that experience that they're having, because it sounds, even when you describe that, I know that so many people, regardless of their situation or their background, that speaks to so many.
Yes, it does. With more experience that I've had in just working with people, while I work with a large variety of people, because a lot of us struggle with feeling marginalized in one way or another, I have certain specifics. I have certain niches that I work with that really, really hone in on certain clients, one being the one we're going to talk about, where it's the strongest kind of experience that this woman has is of being othered, of not being allowed to have a very accepting experience of who she is and the role she plays.
And I think that that is a really good description of that experience of the other and not being accepted. And while that's her experience externally, what I see too with the women that I work with is that's also their internal experience. There's a sense of disconnection and non-acceptance of themselves.
Absolutely. And I've come to recognize in my work with women just in general that one almost never exists without the other.
Yeah. Yes.
The external and the internal typically mirror each other.
Yes. And I think that goes to just that shadow and light. You can't have one or the other, but it's about
Yes.
recognizing the other and integrating it into your experience.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
And so I think, Nam, this is a really good segue into our topic. And I think what I'd love for you to do is to maybe share what this niche is for you, and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. So, Lourdes, the niche that I began to describe a few seconds ago is, imagine me making air quotes right now because it's not how I describe this woman, but it's the way socially we are conditioned to describe her. And that woman is, quote unquote, the other woman. It's the woman who has circumstantially and personally chosen a relationship with someone who is already engaged in another relationship themselves. She is the woman who, when I meet her and when I have conversations with her, we don't describe her as the other woman. We describe her as the woman who is in second place all the time.
Yeah. And I think, for a lot of people listening, they may not realize how this other woman, as she can be described by society, how she's really very present. According to statistics from the Journal of Marriage and Family Therapy, 22% of married men and 14% of married women have acknowledged having an extramarital relationship. And so if you think that 22% of married men are involved in at least one extramarital relationship or extramarital intercourse, then for those 22% of men, there are women who are in relationship with them.
Absolutely. They're having affairs with someone. The statistics are so important, not only because they're really high, but these are also the statistics that are openly disclosed. These are people who volunteer to share this information. The actual number of people who have engaged in this experience from any of the three directions we're talking about is definitely much, much, much higher. And especially in working with the other woman, as I mentioned, the number of women who actually will come out and say, this is something I'm experiencing, this is something I'm in right now, is so, so, so small compared to the actual statistic that exists.
Yes, and I think that leads into what you were, when we were speaking earlier about the isolation that a lot of these women experience. And I think for a woman to actually show up in the therapy room and disclose to her therapist that this is what's happening with me, I mean, that takes so much courage. And I think, as you and I shared when we were connecting in one of the Facebook groups that we belong to, that this is something you and I are seeing more and more and more.
Absolutely. It's so prevalent. And I really like what you just shared about when she comes into the therapy room, because something that I've noticed is this woman who takes the step of seeing a therapist is absolutely accessing a lot of courage. And there's a lot of vulnerability in being able to take that step. So when she typically shows up on my couch, it's interesting and it's almost heartbreaking. The first thing I hear when I ask, this person to describe themselves or what's brought them to therapy, the first thing she will tell me is, I'm in this relationship with a married man. I'm the other woman. This is what I'm doing. And that says how much of an identity-based integration has taken place, where the first thing you say about yourself is, I am the other woman. And that itself speaks so deeply to the more complex and the deeper kind of struggles that this woman is going through. Because in complete honesty, this woman that we are trained to hate, or we are conditioned to imagine as, this really voluptuous secretary, or this near demonic, really, really awful person who's breaking up a relationship, is actually a woman just like you and me.
Yeah.
She is a CEO. She's a professor at a university. She is a mom. She is a sister. She is the person sitting in a coffee shop or the person in front of you at a line in Starbucks. She's not this demonic, awful person. She is a person, and she has now started describing herself as an other. That itself speaks to how much courage it takes to just talk about this.
Yes, and I love that you described her in just human terms. I think oftentimes when we fear something or we don't understand it, we can have this tendency to make it monstrous and to make it almost mythological and unreal. And like you said, viewing her as this hypersexualized, villain, when this is a human being having a human experience, and this is just the way it looks for her.
Yes.
So, Nam, can you share a little bit more about what are the struggles that you see when she's sitting here in front of you and she presents with, I am the other woman, and you begin that process of going within? What are the struggles beneath the surface of her story?
So typically, before I get into the struggles beneath the surface, I want to talk a little bit about the struggles that are on the surface, because I think the surface struggles is what we see the most, and what we dismiss is that there is so much going on underneath, like you said. So typically she will show up very distraught, often very, very angry, very frustrated, because if we're talking about gender and binary terms, he isn't picking me, I'm stuck in this, I'm not eating, I'm not sleeping, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. He's not even my boyfriend. There is a lot of shouldn't. I shouldn't feel this way. I don't understand why I'm feeling this when I made this decision. There's a lot of judgment that instantly shows up. When we peel the layers back in a session, in a conversation, one of the questions that I often ask is, so you are described as the other woman. That's how you described yourself. If you could pick a way to describe this situation that didn't involve the words the other woman, what would you call this? And that's when she often will tearfully start talking about the rejected one, or I feel like I don't deserve anything better. I feel like if I have to be happy with a career and a relationship, then I have to compromise. And the relationship that can exist with the kind of career I have is one that doesn't have a lot of strings attached. And that's what I tend to kind of look at in terms of the middle layer of what's actually going on. And then once we peel back even further, a consistent struggle that I notice is that these women have been othered in other areas of their life. And what I mean by that is when these women, we take an inventory of their life, and I ask them questions like, where else have you felt second place? Or where else have you felt like you have to kind of settle for something, or you're engaging in a choice that you on a daily basis know is not entirely what you may want? That's when struggles of self-esteem show up. That's where struggles of being parented in a way by which you were never good enough show up. A lot of times struggles with achievement show up. There's a lot of deep, deep depression that often shows up where you've defined life to be something that cannot have it all for you. Does that make sense at all?
Yes. And I think, as I was reflecting about what you were saying, Nam, what came to me is that for these women who find themselves in these relationships where they are second, this is not the only time or place in their lives when they have been in this position. This question of when have I been here before?
Yes.
And tracing those strings back to find out where this experience started and where it began to feel normal. And they just continued down this path and find themselves now in this relationship where they are the other woman or a second. And I'm wondering too, if you can speak to how the relationship now becomes a way to not have to feel anxiety and sadness. It becomes, because one of the things I see with my clients is even if they're at this place of feeling so unhappy, so confused, the pain of having to change that is more painful than the pain of staying.
Absolutely. In fact, that is one of the primary dilemmas that she often shows up on my couch with is, I know this is not good for me, but I can't get out. And it's not, from an abuse perspective, it's just, I'm not able to get out. I know what this is doing to me, and I know this is not what I really, really, really want, but I just can't get out. It's been 5 years, it's been 7 years, it's been 6 months, and I just cannot get out. And that is the point where we will often start to look at, and this is a question and a conversation that most are very afraid to have, which is to look at, so in this relationship that you're socially not supposed to have, that makes you this bad, bad person, what about it really works for you? What about do you really, really like? What about it, if you could have your way, would you keep? And taking that direction in exploring what is going on often highlights the different mechanisms that are going on the inside that are, it's making this woman stay in something where you said the pain of getting out is so much worse. What usually doesn't happen, however, is we don't give ourselves permission to recognize something about this is actually working for me. And once that gets highlighted, which is often, oh my gosh, I'm staying in this because I don't feel like I deserve anything else, or every other relationship, is too demanding of my time, or I feel really anxious and I feel really vulnerable in a relationship where it's just the two of us. There are a lot of deeper things that show up where the choice to be in this relationship is no longer the problem. It's actually the solution to something else that she is trying to solve in her life.
I love how you describe that it's actually the solution.
Yes, it absolutely, across the board, that's what I notice.
Nam, can you maybe walk us through how you would actually work with a woman? I know you've spoken about some of the initial steps and then peeling back some of the layers, but continuing on that, what's next in this process?
So the way I work with her is I have a 6-phase process, and this is by no means a process that every single woman would fit. I think each person who shows up on our couch is going about this in a very, very unique way. These phases or these steps are the more general steps that I will take with someone who is in this experience. So one of the initial areas that we sort of touched upon already is when she first comes in, and it's the theme of, what am I doing? I'm so distraught. Why did I do this? It's what I call the oh my gosh phase.
Yeah.
Where it's just about kind of hit you in some way, and you're recognizing that something is not feeling okay here. Once we kind of peel back on those layers, the second step that we work towards, and this takes a little bit, is the phase of acceptance. And this is where a lot of the struggle actually rests, because the idea of acceptance of yourself, accepting that this is the relationship you are in, accepting something that we are trained to not accept and reject in our lives is really, really hard. And that's exactly where the actual work lies, where we move away from I'm engaging in this affair to I am really brokenhearted because I'm with someone who doesn't necessarily look at me the way I want to be looked at. Someone who isn't choosing me, someone who isn't picking me every single hour of every day. And we move into this phase where we no longer talk about this relationship as one that I shouldn't have, but it turns into I'm experiencing a broken heart. I'm experiencing loss. I'm experiencing grief. And this relationship that is considered abnormal is normalized in the therapy room. Does that make sense at all, Lourdes?
Yeah, it does. And I was thinking about, the whole acceptance piece of that acceptance of the reality of what's really happening here. Because I think, at least, what I've seen when working with women in this situation is that when they come in, it's about not being chosen, about when is he going to leave his wife?
Yes.
When are we finally going to be together? Why doesn't he make time for me? And then moving into this phase of what is really happening. What is my role really? You take away the vacations, you take away the gifts, you take away the stolen moments, and you strip it all down to what you really have and what you're really getting. And what does it mean that you're in this space? And it is extremely painful to watch a woman in this phase of acceptance.
You're absolutely right. It's incredibly, incredibly painful and it often leads to a liberation. But to get to that place, there is a lot of looking inward, looking outwards that she is invited to do. And I think that's the core of it all, is how do I bring about a sense of acceptance about things that are unacceptable. And once that shift takes place, we can then move on to the next phase, which I call unhooking and unpacking. And what that actually implies is typically, not always, but typically, these relationships have some form of emotional hooking that takes place. She stays in this relationship that she has all of these ideas about because there is, like I said earlier, there is something that is working for her. It could be a boost in confidence. It could be a thrill. It could be, working out something from her childhood that showed up. There is almost always an invisible hook that she struggles with in a way by which I know I should get out, but I don't. Or maybe I don't want to get out and I don't know what to do. But there is usually a hook. So in this phase, we identify what that hook is, and then we begin a process of unpacking. And something that I'll talk about very often is kind of bringing this invisible suitcase into the therapy office with all of the secret details, the secret feelings, the secret everything that you're not allowed to talk about outside, bringing that into the therapy office, and the two of us figuratively opening the suitcase up and unpacking it to see what are all the pieces that are playing a role here, which are the ones that I want to keep and which are the ones I want to, do away with. So this phase is what I call as the unhooking and the unpacking of this experience.
So really looking at what she's not even aware of that she's carrying, that is weighing her down.
Absolutely. And all of this happens in a way and at a time where we are now in a place in our conversation where it's no longer shame-based. Shame will show up because that's often a very deep-rooted experience for a lot of these women. But we're not looking at this relationship from a shame-based lens. We're looking at it from, honestly, a relationship that looks like almost any other romantic relationship. It's getting permission in the therapy room to really look at yourself and the relationship through a very normalized way. And not through a way of, I shouldn't be talking about this.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yes, as if this relationship can't be approached in the ways maybe other relationships can be because it's the affair relationship or the extramarital relationship.
Exactly. And that, brings me to the next phase where the question is answered of what is it that I really, really want? Because by this time we have we've kind of dealt with some of the surface-based stressors and we've come up with strategies to tackle those. We've moved into acceptance of, what, I can't talk about this in a lot of places, but I'm actually experiencing something that anyone going through a breakup or anyone in a relationship with someone who doesn't treat them in the best way possible would go through. And we've then moved into, as I said, the unhooking and the unpacking. We are now ready to look at, is this really working for me? If this relationship were the rule and not the exception, would I actually pick it? Is this what I really, really want for myself at the end of the day? Do I want to feel second place all day long? Do I want to wait by the phone for that one time when he's going to call and he says, I told her I'm leaving my wife, you're the one for me? The dream conversation that, women hold on to. This is the time when we really, really hone in and get very, very clear on what is it that I really want from my life. And once we, gauge that information, we move into the concluding part of our work, which is repacking that suitcase that we unpacked. Except this time we repack the suitcase with all the things that are empowering, that you actually want, that you have always craved as a person but didn't believe you could get in any other way, and packing all of the elements of this relationship in a way that makes something more respectful of yourself become possible. And that's when you move into the concluding part, which is recognizing that you, no matter what choices you've made in relationships up until this point, you actually deserve first place. And then we figure out how is it that we can go about having that.
So really having her in this process move through this and at the end coming out of it with tools, with a sense of inner strength, a deeper knowledge of herself and what she really wants, so that she is best prepared to move forward and able to make different choices in her relationships.
Exactly that. And it's all coming out of a personal, empowering choice as opposed to, this is really bad. I shouldn't be doing this. And that's why I'm going to get out. Because what I often notice is when it's the second reason, when I have to get out of this because it's this bad thing I'm doing, this woman is likely going to find herself in other areas of her life or making other relational choices where she's back to being second again. And the pattern continues on and on, even though it may not look the same. But when this decision and the tools are used in a way by which it comes from a voice of, you know what, this happened, this is something that I was in, I now know what was working, what isn't working, and I now want something more aligned with who I am because I know who I am and I respect who I am, it leads to more lasting change.
As I'm listening to you, that there's this piece of self-knowledge, self-compassion, and self-acceptance that all connect together to help this woman look at this relationship as an unhealthy experience or choice that she engaged in, normalizing it because if you strip away the details, if you take away the externals, she's in a toxic, unhealthy relationship.
Yeah.
And many women are actually in those relationships, and it may not be showing up as an affair or an extramarital relationship. So those details really, if you can put them aside in the sense of not make them bigger than what they are and not make that the main thing and just focus on this woman getting into healthy relationship with herself, that really is very freeing for her, frees her from the shackles of the shame that
it
she was carrying.
absolutely does. And that's exactly what it's about. It's about freeing yourself. I think a lot of women are very, very trained to think it's about him and it's about everyone else, while they're absolutely casualties to this choice. And by no means am I, dismissing the hurt that this can cause people. It eventually boils down to, I am hurting myself. And there are women who often, and it's not a lot of women, but there are absolutely women who will, at the end of this process, not identify this as unhealthy, but we'll talk about it in terms of it being unhelpful. Because at one point, this was the healthiest that it could get for her. And so if we move into describing it as, you played whatever it was being played out, that part of your life has happened, you now want to make choices that are more helpful for you. And sometimes that can mean a relationship which, is not with someone who's in a relationship already, but is not, the conventional, traditional relationship of being married and staying together and being together all day long. Because a lot of times what these women are looking for is permission to have relationships that don't look like the conventional have to relationships. And so this is also a time when you recognize that, you know what, I've done all of this work and I've recognized that I don't want to be married with kids and have the perfect life, the picket fence. That's just not who I am. I actually want someone who's okay with a long distance marriage.
Yeah.
But it's coming to that conclusion of, I am going to choose this because it's good for me, as opposed to, I don't know what else to do because I don't know what's going on the inside for me.
Yeah, I like how that is just a lot more intentional about why they are making these choices and realizing that if there was a need or a goal that perhaps this relationship where you were the second best was helping you to feel or to achieve, that perhaps there are other ways to have that same experience without going through this painful emotional process where you're the, quote, other woman.
Exactly. And it goes back to what we spoke of at the start, where you're now finding a different, more self-respecting, more self-compassionate and self-loving solution to whatever you identified as the struggle. And now it doesn't involve being the other woman. It involves something entirely different. It involves making an intentional choice in a relationship where you have your custom designed way of being with this other person and it doesn't cause any distress.
Yeah, because I love how you pointed that out, Nam, because with many of the women I work with, I see that they are not going to feel their best, their most authentic in, what may be perceived as the traditional relationships. They may want something that allows them more space and more freedom. Also, for a lot of these women, they are very intelligent, very strong women, and they struggle with finding a partner, a significant other who can handle that.
Absolutely. And that's where this even becomes a feminist kind of issue or a feminist struggle, where somewhere in the deep, deep, deep corners of this woman's heart, she has recognized that for me to be the person I am, with the intelligence, with, even the professional position that I'm at, or the way I conduct myself, the only person who will be okay with that is the person who is in my life from 9 to 5 and then goes home to someone else.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I can be the strong, independent career woman and still be in some kind of relationship, because who's going to want me if I look like I have it all, and if I look as strong as I actually am, and I'm as successful as I am? Which is why it brings me to that stereotype I mentioned, where typically what we think of in terms of the other woman is this person with really low self-esteem and hypersexualized, and it's the secretary. The theme of the secretary will keep showing up. And what I notice in my work, it's usually women in leadership positions.
Yes. Yeah. I think too that with the shift of moving from this is a terrible, horrible thing and you are a bad woman for being in this situation, when you look at it in terms of just being an unhealthy or unhelpful relationship, it really gives them permission to not look at this as something that they have to forgive. Because I often hear that a lot, where how do I forgive myself with the shame? And again, to say, just as you said, that it's not condoning this.
Sure.
But what it is about is looking at your choices and understanding where they came from and having compassion for those parts of you that brought you to this place. And all of us at some level have found ourselves in situations where we did not feel good about being there and how we got there. But really, there's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be forgiven, because that also implies that you're a bad person. This is, because one of the things I have found, I don't know if you'll agree with this or not, Nam, is the women I work with did not intend or plan to find themselves in these relationships.
Oh, I am so glad you said that, because this is actually something I say to my clients is, you didn't wake up one day and decide this is what you were going to do with your time. It wasn't like, should I go to Disneyland, or should I watch shows on Netflix, or should I, engage in a relationship where I'm going to feel like crap and people are going to get hurt. That's not how we go about this. That's not how women in this position go about this, even though that's often how they are portrayed. Like, oh, you're breaking up someone else's relationship. But that's not what she ordered. She didn't decide that this was going to be her hobby. What happened was a whole bunch of other stuff, and the way that made some sort of sense to her at that time in her life was to engage in a relationship that comes with all of these complications that often do hurt other people, and she's almost always very aware of that, but she's also hurting herself, and there is absolutely no room to recognize, I am getting hurt too.
Yes. And so if they can see that this is something that unfolded for them and understand how it happened, then they are better able to choose differently.
Yes, absolutely. It goes back to asking yourself, if you're in that position, the question of, what is it that I'm trying to solve here? What am I trying to heal? What am I trying to feel better about? Where in my life have I been in this position before? Was it with my parent? Was it in a different relationship? Where has this happened before? What is this really about? And the important thing that will show up in therapy very often is, and I'll ask my clients this question when they're approaching the end of our work together, is, if you were to go back to your very first session, and if you were to tell me, why is it that you are in therapy today, what would you say? And 9 out of 10 women, as cliched as that statistic sounds, 9 out of 10 women will give me an answer that has nothing to do with being the other woman. It has everything to do, with, I was really mistreated when I was growing up. And it has to do with, I've never really felt good about myself, or I've never really felt like I can get everything I want, but they will not describe their presenting concern as I'm the other woman.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it really,
Yeah,
really.
and yeah, as I'm thinking too, as clients have, finished therapy, that and we talk about where they are, it has nothing to do with how they began the healing process.
Yes. Yeah.
So, if there's a woman listening right now and she is going through this experience, what would you say to her?
I would tell her, gosh, I wish I could pick up the phone and speak to every single woman in that position. Since I can't do that, what I would tell her, the number one thing to find in her life is a support system, a friend, a therapist, someone she can have a conversation with where she doesn't have to talk about this experience like it's a bad thing. She can talk about it like a struggle that she's going through, and she can be fully accepted for what is going on for her. And the reason why I emphasize finding someone else, because even though so much of the work has to do with you and you discovering who you are and getting really, really empowered, in that sense, a lot of the shame, a lot of the othering, as I call it, is happening because of voices that were born out of external influence. They were not born out of an internal decision. And so finding a space, like I said, it could be a friend, it could be a therapist, finding a space where you can allow yourself to freely talk about this and figure it out instead of feeling like you have to constantly live in secret is absolutely the first step to moving into a more liberated first place position in your life.
I love that, Nam, putting yourself into that liberated first place position, not waiting for something external to happen so that you're in that position. That's
Yes,
beautiful.
and the additional part that I will say to anyone who's listening to this has been or is in this othered relationship is to ask yourself my 5 key questions, which I've already gone over. And you can do this by yourself. You can do this at home. You don't have to do this in therapy, which is one, if you could call this position something other than being the other woman, what would you call this? Second, if this relationship were the rule, it wasn't the exception, would you make this choice? Would you pick this relationship for yourself? My third question is, what about this relationship really, really works for you? And what is it that you wish you could keep or find in another relationship? Fourth question is, what is the hook for you? What is it that's truly keeping you in? And my last question, and probably one of the most important ones, is where else in your life have you been othered? Where else in your life have you felt second place? So these 5 questions will start opening up some different ways of experiencing this, of different ways of looking at this. And that's when you want to take your answers and see what you would like to do with them. Whether it's take them to a therapist or whether it's start, making different choices for yourself, however one would want to go about it.
Nam, those questions are amazing, and I am going to be using them in my work. Oh, you're welcome. No, those are really good questions, and I think that, like you said, they can be used simply for raising your own awareness and beginning your own healing process.
Yes.
And you can use them with someone else who you trust, who you feel safe with.
And that part is it's so important in this journey because this is a journey. There's no relationship prison that this woman is going to be sent to. There is no eternal punishment to go through here. This is a journey, and you're discovering parts of yourself that are in darkness, and you're shining a light on them and then deciding if you want that to continue for you or you want something else. That's what this is really about.
Nam, thank you so much for being here on the podcast and sharing your insights and wisdom and compassion for women who are struggling with this situation in their lives. I am so grateful that you also have an open heart for this group of women, and I learned so much from sharing this time with you.
Oh, Lourdes, thank you so much for having me on this podcast because I think it takes a very, very special podcast interviewer, it takes a very special therapist, it takes a very special person to recognize that this does need to be spoken about. So just by the act of inviting me to have this conversation with you is such a deep honor, not just to me, but for every woman out there who has been othered. I think the two of us we're giving her permission in our dialogue today to not feel othered and to recognize that she is a person like everyone else. So thank you so much for giving me this platform to highlight some of the struggles that many women feel they're not allowed to even talk about.
You're welcome, Nam. And again, it's been an honor to have you on the podcast. And could you share with our listeners what's the best way to get in touch with you? And maybe if you have any resources or recommendations for places or websites or books that might be a support to them?
Absolutely. The best way to reach me is via email. I check it very, very consistently, and my email is nam@narrativetherapysd.com. And you can also find my email on my website, which is soulnarratives.com. It's going through a major, major upgrade right now, but I do have one in place. What I would also recommend is there is a book that a lot of my clients often find helpful, and it's called Being the Other Woman. It's the complete handbook, and it's easily available on Amazon. It's a book by Petra Falk, Falk.
Okay, and I will make sure to have links to all of the resources that you mentioned in our show notes.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad you did this.
Okay, thank you so much, Nam.
Thank you, Lourdes.
I hope you found today's conversation with Nam informative, and I understand that the topic is one that causes a lot of discomfort. There's a lot of emotional triggers connected to this area. My hope is that if you are a woman who finds herself in this situation, that you understand and realize that there is support for you and you are not alone, and that you feel comfortable seeking support for yourself from someone you trust or from a therapist. For show notes to today's episode and for links to the resources mentioned, please visit www.lourdesviado.com/women in depth. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.